Prologue. Lord Carcel. A shriek followed Carcel just as he turned down a corridor. He paused, one of his gloves half removed and weariness coloring his expression. He could hear the scurrying steps of the noblewomen that had flagged him down coming from behind him. "My apologies, Lord Carcel, but would you be able to offer us some assistance? Lady Porteo has been overcome by a spell of dizziness. Oh, what are we to do? We are but fragile ladies." Carcel replaced his glove as a shadow of annoyance flitted across his face. It was gone as soon as it appeared, however, and when he turned, the noblewomen only saw the unreadable yet kind countenance of an honorable gentleman. The one asking for his help only stared, seemingly at a loss for how to continue begging for his aid. Her eyes were filled with the same rapture Carcel had seen hundreds of times before, whether it was a lady of the Ortega imperial court or an aging nobleman looking for a toy. Carcel's breathtaking good looks were a constant in his life, no matter how tiresome he found the women or how repugnant he found the men. Being the son of the most prestigious noble family in the Ortega Empire and the most handsome man in the city of Mendoza meant Carcel's place at the top of society was undisputed. If only he could find all the balding men in Ortega and gouge out their eyes so the disgusting leeches could never dirty him with their hungry stares again, then things would be perfect. "Are you all right?" He fixed a perfect smile over his usually impassive features. As a naval officer, he generally wanted to give the impression of indifference, but that would not serve him here. Instead, he forced the austere line of his lips to remain in a gentle curve as he regarded the noblewoman. The woman was still staring, perhaps bewitched by the way his lustrous blonde hair framed his gallant expression. After a beat too long, she finally remembered her purpose and quickly shook her head. I'm fine. But Lady Porteo, we waited and waited for a kind gentleman to pass by, but no one came. What a blessing that you have appeared at such a critical moment." Carcel's eyes darted away from the plain woman standing in front of him and landed on another noble lady who was leaning against the wall and breathing heavily. The two ladies standing next to her jumped when they noticed and began making a fuss, massaging her hands and fanning her face with exaggerated motions as if they wanted Carcel to notice. All the while they would exclaim, "Oh my, can you breathe, Lady Porteo? Are you able to stand? Oh dear." It was evident they wanted Carcel to hear them. Asking such questions now was a bit overdue. If this were truly an emergency situation, one of them would have rushed back to the banquet hall as soon as the Countess collapsed. Seeing as that was not the case, the Countess was perfectly fine. In fact, these ladies were never waiting for a kind gentleman to take a poor, suffering woman to a carriage or her room. They had been waiting for Carcel. It happened every time there was a banquet at the palace. It was almost like a game the Ortegan noblewomen played. Wait along one of Carcel's preferred paths out of the banquet hall and find some reason to get him alone. Carcel's expression never faltered as he remarked, "She seems extremely unwell." He nodded out of courtesy and walked towards the Countess, who was now dramatically sinking to the ground. He vaguely recalled her late husband, Count Porteo, had passed away a year ago. No wonder the young widow was desperate for a male touch. "Will you be able to stand, my lady?" offered Carcel. He knew better than to touch a woman without getting her to ask for it first. He was a seasoned pro, after all. The widow blushed through her intentionally pale makeup. "I'm afraid not. I have no strength left in my legs." She barely paused, before giving him permission. "Then, please allow me to help you up on your feet." When Carcel reached for her hand, the widow's entire body fell into his arms. He tutted silently. She was being too eager for his taste, but he played along. Hopefully, she would turn out to be more entertaining than the dreadful imperial ball. He then asked with a seemingly innocent smile, "Should I walk you back to your carriage?" The widow's gaze trembled, worrying that her pursuit was in vain. and he would simply escort her back without getting under her skirt. She opened her mouth but didn't quite know how to redirect the conversation. As if on cue, one of the ladies who had pretended to nurse the Countess earlier stepped up. "You needn't do that, Lord Carcel. She is simply suffering from a dizzy spell and needs some rest. Traveling to the Porteo Manor on the outskirts of the city will take far too long." "Then I believe, I know, where the lady could catch her breath nearby," interrupted Carcel, before she had a chance to continue jabbering more excuses to get the two of them alone in a room. The south wing of the palace had a few lounges that were rarely visited and would be perfect for illicit affairs like this. He scooped the Countess up into his arms and carried her to the third floor. None of the fawning ladies followed him or acted worried about the supposedly sick woman. The widow and her friends were clearly rookies at this game. Next time, he should advise them on how to keep up the pretense in a more convincing manner, except that Carcel was in no position to advise anyone or to worry about second encounters. He was only interested in a woman for the night. When the voices faded to a murmur, the Countess whispered with hesitation, "I don't know how I should thank you for your kindness. Any Ortegan officer should help a dame in distress. Do not worry about repaying the favor," replied Carcel. Countess Porteo looked up at Carcel with genuine adoration in her eyes. "I am honored and assured that such a respectable officer guards the shores of Ortega." For a woman who had lavished herself with all the power and money her title provided, she certainly played the part of the meek, delicate lady well when the occasion called for it. Carcel Escalante de Esposa. The combination of his flawless appearance and his white navy uniform seemed to attract many noblewomen and the occasional nobleman to throw their bodies at him. This Countess was no exception. Thankfully, his powerful family name protected him from being stabbed by a woman driven mad by lust for his ungodly attractiveness or a man blinded by envy for his overwhelming popularity. I was surprised to learn that the heir of the Escalante family would willingly put himself in harm's way on the front lines at the Sea of Nuñera. After your late grandfather brought about a moment of peace, those seas have been plagued by conflict with the pirates of Tala. I heard that you enlisted to carry on your family legacy. The Countess had certainly done her homework. She droned on about the naval history she had memorized to impress him. She seemed to have forgotten all about her pretense of being a sick lady in distress. "My late grandfather always said that the greatest honor comes with the greatest responsibility," Carcel said with a practiced show of determination. He had repeated this line with countless women, and it worked every time. Upon hearing how he was not only strikingly handsome, but also responsible and intelligent, Countess Porteo started to breathe heavier with her desire for this perfect specimen. Overcome with her arousal, she suddenly jumped out of his arms and nearly pushed him to the ground. Carcel stepped back with caution. "Lady Porteo," he said, trying to calm her down, "we're a bit exposed here." "No, right here will do just fine," breathed the widow. By this point, she had forgotten all about her ruse of acting faint and was nearly attacking him with fervor. "Well, at the very least, we should go inside." Carcel was interrupted again by her hungry lips. He tried to push her towards a room nearby. "No, it's too dark inside. Let us do it out here," she insisted. Carcel managed to get half a sentence in. "What's wrong with darkness?" "Your uniform. I need to see you in your uniform." She was nearly deranged with her uniform fetish. She pulled her own dress down to her waist. Her breasts were shivering in the faint light, tempting Carcel to come forward. He sighed and wondered for a moment why all these women seemed to lose their mind when they caught a glimpse of him. Was it the beautiful face, or the prestige and power of the Escalante name, or the combination of both? As the heir, Carcel would eventually inherit his father's title. Of the 17 families endowed with a title from the Ortega imperial family, the House of Escalante ranked as one of the most powerful. Carcel was born with this power and a physical beauty that entranced anyone within a 6-foot radius. This lethal combination meant that Carcel had been showered with attention from women, envy from men, and even jumped at by women who wanted to take their clothes off in a corridor despite his unsociable personality. By the time he was 15 years old, he was surrounded by ladies in their ripe 20s. By 17 years of age, he was followed by admirers wherever he went. And by the time he enlisted in the Navy, he had left younger women behind and developed a taste for more mature women who tended to be less clingy. Now that he was 23 years of age, the world was his oyster. Carcel pulled the Countess into his arms and pushed her against the wall as their tongues intertwined. He would rate her a solid 7 out of 10. The passion in her desperate kiss somewhat made up for her pathetic kissing technique. Usually, he would never consent to doing something so dangerous in the open. But doing it out in the open might not be so bad, he thought. And she deserves a special treat for all the effort she put into this one-night stand. He grabbed her breast and traced his lips down her neck. Her face melted into ecstasy. She buttoned up his uniform with one hand and pulled up her dress with the other. Carcel did not mind her obsession with his uniform. Keeping his uniform on meant that he could save himself the hassle of putting his clothes back on after the sex was over. He appreciated the convenience as a small benefit of enlisting in the Navy. Though the Countess kept chatting, he didn't listen to a word she said and focused on her body. He occasionally mumbled some meaningless replies and vaguely noticed that she mentioned someone's name several times. Then, all of a sudden, the sound of that name registered a familiar face in his mind. Inés Valestena de Perez. The image of his fiancée's stern, unemotional face was enough to counteract any physical stimulation. Carcel's arousal vanished in an instant, and his immaculate face crumpled into a frown. Countess Porteo continued with her unwelcome gossip. Inés, your fiancée, does not deserve you. What a plain woman. She may be from a prestigious family, but she has such a bland personality to match her bland face. Carcel stared at the wall for a few seconds and turned his face away to avoid the widow's lips. She would be better suited as a nun. How can she not be moved by a flawless man like yourself? The Countess paused mid-sentence. Carcel trailed her gaze, curious about the source of her sudden pause. And there stood Inés Valestena, observing them with an uninterested gaze, her expression perpetually as dull and uninspiring as that of a nun. Carcel had been engaged to her for 17 years, and now, for the first time, she discovered him with a half-naked lady in his arms.